Chapter 5 of Mutual Aid, a Factor of Evolution. This is a LibraVox recording. All LibraVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit libravox.org. Recording by Enko. Mutual Aid, a Factor of Evolution by Peter Kropotkin. Chapter 5. Mutual aid in the medieval city. Sociability and need of mutual aid and support are such inherent parts of human nature that at no time of history can we discover men living in small isolated families, fighting each other for the means of subsistence. On the contrary, modern research, as we saw it in the two preceding chapters, proves that since the very beginning of their prehistoric life, men used to agglomerate into gens, clans or tribes, maintained by an idea of common descent and by worship of common ancestors. For thousands and thousands of years, this organization has kept men together, even though there was no authority whatever to impose it. It has deeply impressed all subsequent development of mankind, and when the bonds of common descent had been loosened by migrations on a grand scale, while the development of a separated family within the clan itself had destroyed the old unity of the clan, a new form of union, territorial in its principle, the village community, was called into existence by the social genius of men. This institution again kept men together for a number of centuries, permitting them to further develop their social institutions and to pass through some of the darkest periods of history without being dissolved into loose aggregations of families and individuals, to make a further step in their evolution and to work out a number of secondary social institutions, several of which have survived down to the present time. We have now to follow the further development of the same ever-living tendency for mutual aid, taking the village communities of the so-called barbarians at a time when they were making a new start of civilization after the fall of the Roman Empire. We have to study the new aspects taken by the sociable wants of the masses in the Middle Ages, and especially in the medieval guilds and the medieval city. Far from being the fighting animals they have often been compared to, the barbarians of the first centuries of our era, like so many Mongolians, Africans, Arabs, and so on, who still continue in the same barbarian stage, invariably preferred peace to war, with the exception of a few tribes which had been driven during the great migrations into unproductive deserts or highlands, and were thus compelled periodically to prey upon their better favoured neighbours. Apart from these, the great bulk of the Teutons, the Saxons, the Celts, the Slavonians, and so on, very soon after they had settled in their newly conquered abodes, reverted to the spade or to their herds. The earliest barbarian codes already represent to us societies composed of peaceful agricultural communities, not hordes of men at war with each other. These barbarians covered the country with villages and farmhouses. W. Arnold, in his Wanderungen und Assiedlungen der Deutschen, stamp page 431, even maintains that one half of the now arable area in Middle Germany must have been reclaimed from the 6th to the 9th century. Nietzsche (Geschichte des Deutschen Volkes, Leipzig, 1883, volume 1, shares the same opinion. They cleared the forest, bridged the torrents, and colonized the formerly quite uninhabited wilderness, and they left the uncertain warlike pursuits to brotherhoods, scholae, or trusts of unruly men gathered round temporary chieftains, who wandered about offering their adventurous spirit, their arms, and their knowledge of warfare for the protection of populations, only too anxious to be left in peace. The warrior bands came and went, prosecuting their family threads, but the great mass continued to till the soil, taking but little notice of their would-be rulers, so long as they did not interfere with the independence of their village communities. Leo and Botta, Histoire d'Italie, French edition, 1844, tome 1, page 37. The new occupiers of Europe evolved the systems of land tenure and soil culture which are still in force with hundreds of millions of men. They work out their systems of compensation for wrongs, instead of the old tribal blood revenge. They learned the first rudiments of industry, and while they fortified their villages with palisaded walls, or erected towers and earthen forts whereto to repair in case of a new invasion, they soon abandoned the task of defending these towers and forts to those who made of war a speciality. The very peacefulness of the barbarians, certainly not their supposed warlike instincts, thus became the source of their subsequent subjection to the military chieftains. It is evident that the very mode of life of the armed brotherhoods offered them more facilities for enrichment than the tillers of the soil could find in their agricultural communities. Even now we see that armed men occasionally come together to shoot down matabeles and to rob them of their droves of cattle, though the matabeles only want peace and are ready to buy it at a high price. The scholars of old certainly were not more scrupulous than the scholars of our own time. Droves of cattle, iron (which was extremely costly at that time). The composition for the stealing of a simple knife was 15 solidi, and of the iron parts of a mill 45 solidi (see on this subject Lamprecht, which Schaff und der Franken in Rome's Historische Taschenbuch 1883, page 52). According to the Ripporian law, the sword, the spear, and the iron armor of a warrior attain the value of at least 25 cows or 2 years of a freeman's labor. A cuirass alone was valued in the Salic law (Des Michels, quoted by Michelet), at as much as 36 bushels of wheat. And slaves were appropriated in this way, and although most acquisitions were wasted on the spot in those glorious feasts of which epic poetry has so much to say, still some part of the robbed riches was used for further enrichment. There was plenty of waste land and no lack of men ready to till it if only they could obtain the necessary cattle and implements. Whole villages ruined by murrains, pests, fires, or raids of new immigrants were often abandoned by their inhabitants who went anywhere in search of new abodes. They still do so in Russia in similar circumstances, and if one of the herdmen of the armed brotherhoods offered the peasants some cattle for a fresh start, some iron to make a plough, if not the plough itself, his protection from further raids, and a number of years free from all obligations before they should begin to repay their contracted debt, they settled upon the land. And when, after a hard fight with bad crops, inundations, and pestilences, those pioneers began to repay their debts, they fell into servile obligations towards the protector of the territory. Wealth undoubtedly did accumulate in this way, and power always follows wealth. The chief wealth of the chieftains for a long time was in their personal domains, peopled partly with prisoner slaves, but chiefly in the above way. On the origin of property, see Innermaßtenegs, Die Ausbildung der großen Grundherrschaften in Deutschland in Schmolers Forschungen, Midi, 1st, 1878, F. Dans, Geschichte der germanischen und romanischen Völker, Berlin, 1881, Morers, Dorfversagung, Guizot, Essai sur l'histoire de France, Men's Village Community, Botta's Histoire d'Italie, Sibom Vinogradov, G.R. Green, etc. And yet, the more we penetrate into the life of those times, the 6th and 7th centuries of our era, the more we see that another element, besides wealth and military force, was required to constitute the authority of a few. It was an element of law and tide, a desire of the masses to maintain peace and to establish what they considered to be justice, which gave to the chieftains of the Scoli, kings, dukes, knights, and the like the force they acquired 200 or 300 years later. That same idea of justice, conceived as an adequate revenge for the wrong done, which had grown in the tribal stage, now passed as a red thread through the history of subsequent institutions, and much more even than military or economic causes, it became the basis upon which the authority of the kings and the feudal lords was founded. In fact, one of the chief preoccupations of the barbarian village community always was, as it still is with our barbarian contemporaries, to put a speedy end to the feuds which arose from the then current conception of justice. When a quarrel took place, the community at once interfered, and after the folkmob had heard the case, it settled the amount of composition (vergeld) to be paid to the wrong person or to his family, as well as the threat or fine for breach of peace, which had to be paid to the community. Interior quarrels were easily appeased in this way, but when feuds broke out between two different tribes or two confederations of tribes, notwithstanding all measures taken to prevent them, see Sir Henry Maine's International Law, London, 1888. The difficulty was to find an arbiter or sentence finder whose decision should be accepted by both parties alike, both for his impartiality and for his knowledge of the oldest law. The difficulty was the greater as the customary laws of different tribes and confederations were at variance as to the compensation due in different cases. It therefore became habitual to take the sentence finder from among such families or such tribes as were reputed for keeping the law of all in its purity, of being versed in the songs, triads, sagas, etc., by means of which law was perpetuated in memory, and to retain law in this way became a sort of art, a mystery carefully transmitted in certain families from generation to generation. Thus in Iceland and in other Scandinavian lands, at every old thing or national folk mold, a lovsmonk used to recite the whole law from memory for the enlightening of the assembly, and in Ireland there was, as is known, a special class of men reputed for the knowledge of the old traditions, and therefore enjoying a great authority as judges. Ancient Laws of Ireland Introduction, Nice, Études de droit international, tome 1er, 1896, pages 86 sequence. Among the Osset, the arbiters from three oldest villages enjoy a special reputation. M. Kovalevsky's Modern Custom and Old Law, Moscow 1886, second, 217, Russian. Again, when we are told by the Russian annals that some stems of northwest Russia, moved by the growing disorder which resulted from clans rising against clans, appealed to Norman Varangier to be their judges and commanders of the warrior school, and when we see the Neas or dukes elected for the next 200 years always from the same Norman family, we cannot but recognize that the Slavonians trusted to the Normans for a better knowledge of the law, which will be equally recognized as good by different Slavonian kings. In this case, the possession of runes used for the transmission of old customs was a decided advantage in favor of the Normans, but in other cases there are often indications that the eldest branch of a stem, the supposed mother branch, was appealed to supply the judges, and its decisions were relied upon as just. It is permissible to think that this conception (related to the conception of tanistry) played an important part in the life of the period, but research has not yet been directed that way. While at a later epoch we see a distinct tendency towards taking the sentence finders from the Christian clergy, which at that time kept still to the fundamental, now forgotten principle of Christianity, that retaliation is no act of justice. At that time the Christian clergy opened the churches as places of asylum for those who fled from blood revenge, and they willingly acted as arbiters in criminal cases, always opposing the old tribal principle of life for life and wound for wound. In short, the deeper we penetrate into the history of early institutions, the less we find grounds for the military theory of origin of authority. Even that power which later on became such a source of oppression seems, on the contrary, to have found its origin in the peaceful inclinations of the masses. In all these cases the threat, which often amounted to half the compensation, went to the folkmote, and from times immemorial it used to be applied to folks of common utility and defense. It has still the same destination (the erection of towers) among the Kabyles and certain Mongolian stems, and we have direct evidence that even several centuries later the judicial fines in Pskov and several French and German cities continued to be used for the repair of the city walls. It was distinctly stated in the Charter of St. Quentin of the year 1002 that the ransom for houses which had to be demolished for crimes went for the city walls. The same destination was given to the Ungel in German cities. At Pskov, the cathedral was the bank for the fines, and from this fund money was taken for the wills. It was thus quite natural that the fines should be handed over to the sentence finder, who was bound in return both to maintain the schooling of armed men to whom the defense of the territory was trusted, and to execute the sentences. This became a universal custom in the 8th and 9th centuries, even when the sentence finder was an elected bishop. The germ of a combination of what we should now call the judicial power and the executive thus made its appearance. But to these two functions the attribution of the duke or king was strictly omitted. He was no ruler of the people, the supreme power still belonging to the folkmote, not even a commander of a popular militia. When the folk took to arms, it marched under a separate also elected commander, who was not a subordinate but an equal to the king. Somme, Franzische Richtung Jerick des Safassung, page 23, also needs Gestes des Deutschen Volks. First, 78. The king was a lord on his personal domain only. In fact, in barbarian language, the word konung, koning, or sinning, synonymous with the Latin rex, had no other meaning than that of a temporary leader or chieftain of a band of men. The commander of a flotilla of boats, or even of a single pirate boat, was also a konung. Until the present day, the commander of fishing in Norway is named not Kong, the king of the nets. See the excellent remarks on this subject in Augustin Thierry's Lettres sur l'histoire de France, 7th letter. The barbarian translations of parts of the Bible are extremely instructive on this point. Close footnote. The veneration attached later on to the personality of a king did not yet exist, and while treason to the king was punished by death, the slaying of a king could be recouped by the payment of compensation. A king simply was valued so much more than a free man. Open footnote. 36 times more than a noble, according to the Anglo-Saxon law. In the Code of Rotary, the slaying of a king is however punished by death, but open bracket, apart from Roman influence, close bracket, this new disposition was introduced open bracket in 646 close bracket in the Lombardian law, as remarked by Leo and Botta, to cover the king from blood revenge, the king being at that time the executioner of his own sentences, open bracket, as the tribe formerly was of its own sentences, close bracket. He had to be protected by a special disposition, the more so as several Lombardian kings before Rotary had been slain in succession. Open bracket, Leo and Botta, first chapter, first 69 to 90, close bracket, close footnote. And when King knew, open bracket, or Canute, close bracket, had killed one man of his own scholar, the saga represents him convoking his comrades to a thing where he stood on his knees imploring pardon. He was pardoned, but not till he had agreed to pay 9 times the regular composition, of which 1/3 went to himself for the loss of one of his men, 1/3 to the relatives of the slain man, and 1/3 open bracket the thread, close bracket, to the scholar. Open footnote. Kaufmann Dutch Gilkich BD first die Germanen de Uzet, page 133, close footnote. In reality, a complete change had to be accomplished in the current conceptions, under the double influence of the Church and the students of Roman law, before an idea of sanctity began to be attached to the personality of the king. However, it lies beyond the scope of these essays to follow the gradual development of authority out of the elements just indicated. Historians such as Mr. and Mrs. Green for this country, Augustin Thierry, Michelet and Lucier for France, Kaufmann, Janssen, W. Arnold, and even Nitz for Germany, Leo and Botta for Italy, Bielaev, Kostomarov and their followers for Russia, and many others have fully told that tale. They have shown how populations, once free and simply agreeing to feed a certain portion of their military defenders, gradually became the serfs of these protectors, how commendation to the church or to a lord became a hard necessity for the freemen, how each lord's and bishop's castle became a robber's nest, how feudalism was imposed in a word, and how the crusades, by freeing the serf who wore the cross, gave the first impulse to popular emancipation. All this need not be retold in this place, our chief aim being to follow the constructive genius of the masses in the mutual aid institutions. At a time when the last vestiges of barbarian freedom seemed to disappear and Europe, fallen under the dominion of thousands of petty rulers, was marching towards the constitution of such theocracies and despotic states as had followed the barbarian stage during the previous start of civilization, or of barbarian monarchies such as we see now in Africa, life in Europe took another direction. It went on lines similar to those it had once taken in the cities of antique Greece, with a unanimity which seems almost incomprehensible, and for a long time was not understood by historians. The urban agglomerations down to the smallest burgs began to shake off the yoke of their worldly and clerical lords. The fortified village rose against the lord's castle, defied it first, attacked it next, and finally destroyed it. The movement spread from spot to spot, involving every town on the surface of Europe, and in less than 100 years 3 cities had been called into existence on the coast of the Mediterranean, the North Sea, the Baltic, the Atlantic Ocean, down to the fjords of Scandinavia, at the feet of the Apennines, the Alps, the Black Forest, the Grampians, and the Carpathians, in the plains of Russia, Hungary, France, and Spain. Everywhere the same revolt took place, with the same features passing through the same phases, leading to the same results. Wherever men had found or expected to find some protection behind their town walls, they instituted their conjurations, their fraternities, their friendships, united in one common idea, and boldly marching towards a new life of mutual support and liberty. And they succeeded so well that in 300 or 400 years they had changed the very face of Europe. They had covered the country with beautiful sumptuous buildings, expressing the genius of free unions of free men, unrivaled since for their beauty and expressiveness, and they bequeathed to the following generations all the arts, all the industries, of which our present civilization, with all its achievements and promises for the future, is only a further development. And when we now look to the forces which have produced these grand results, we find them not in the genius of individual heroes, not in the mighty organization of huge states or the political capacities of their rulers, but in the very same current of mutual aid and support which we saw at work in the village community, and which was vivified and reinforced in the Middle Ages by a new form of unions, inspired by the very same spirit, but shaped on a new model, the guilds. It is well known by this time that feudalism did not imply a dissolution of the village community, although the lord had succeeded in imposing servile labour upon the peasants, and had appropriated for himself such rights as were formerly vested in the village community alone (taxes, mortmain, duties on inheritances and mortgages). The peasants had nevertheless maintained the two fundamental rights of their communities, the common possession of the land and self-jurisdiction. In olden times, when a king sent his vogue to a village, the peasants received him with flowers in one hand and arms in the other, and asked him which law he intended to apply, the one he found in the village or the one he brought with him, and in the first case they handed him the flowers and accepted him, while in the second case they fought him. Dr. F. Dan Ugerstich, Der Germanischen und Romanischen Volker, Berlin, 1881, BD 1st, 96. Now they accepted the king's or the lord's official whom they could not refuse, but they maintained the folkmote's jurisdiction, and themselves nominated 6, 7, or 12 judges who acted with the lord's judge in the presence of the folkmote as arbiters and sentence finders. In most cases the official had nothing left to him but to confirm the sentence and to levy the customary thread. This precious right of self-jurisdiction, which at that time means self-administration and self-legislation, had been maintained through all the struggles, and even the lawyers by whom Karl the Great was surrounded could not abolish it. They were bound to confirm it. At the same time, in all matters concerning the community's domain, the folkmote retained its supremacy and (as shown by Morea) often claimed submission from the lord himself. In land tenure matters, no growth of feudalism could break this resistance. The village community kept its ground, and when in the 9th and 10th centuries the invasions of the Normans, the Arabs and the Ugrians had demonstrated that military scholae were of little value for protecting the land, a general movement began all over Europe for fortifying the villages with stone walls and citadels. Thousands of fortified centres were then built by the energies of the village communities, and once they had built their walls, once a common interest had been created in this new sanctuary, the town walls, they soon understood that they could henceforward resist the encroachments of their inner enemies, the lords, as well as the invasions of foreigners. A new life of freedom began to develop within the fortified enclosures. The medieval city was born. If I thus follow the views long since advocated by Morea (Geschichte der Stadtverfassung in Deutschland, Erlangen, 1869), it is because he has fully proved the uninterrupted evolution from the village community to the medieval city, and that his views alone can explain the universality of the communal movement. Savigny and H. Horn and their followers have certainly proved that the traditions of the Roman municipia had never totally disappeared, but they took no account of the village community period which the barbarians lived through before they had any cities. The fact is that whenever mankind made a new start in civilization, in Greece, Rome, or Middle Europe, it passed through the same stages: the tribe, the village community, the free city, the state, each one naturally evolving out of the preceding stage. Of course, the experience of each preceding civilization was never lost. Greece (itself influenced by Eastern civilizations) influenced Rome, and Rome influenced our civilization, but each of them begin from the same beginning, the tribe. And just as we cannot say that our states are continuations of the Roman state, so also can we not say that the medieval cities of Europe including Scandinavia and Russia were a continuation of the Roman cities. They were a continuation of the barbarian village community, influenced to a certain extent by the traditions of the Roman towns. No period of history could better illustrate the constructive powers of the popular masses than the 10th and 11th centuries, when the fortified villages and marketplaces, representing so many others amidst the feudal forest, began to free themselves from their lord's yoke, and slowly elaborated the future city organization. But unhappily this is a period about which historical information is especially scarce. We know their results, but little has reached us about the means by which they were achieved. Under the protection of their walls, the city's folkmotes, either quite independent or led by the chief noble or merchant families, conquered and maintained the right of electing the military defensor and supreme judge of the town, or at least of choosing between those who pretended to occupy this position. In Italy, the young communes were continually sending away their defensors or domini, fighting those who refused to go. The same went on in the east. In Bohemia, rich and poor alike (Bohemica, gentis magni et parvi, nobles et ignobiles) took part in the election. Open footnote. M. Kovalevsky, Modern Customs and Ancient Laws of Russia, open bracket, Ilchester Lectures, London 1891, Lecture 4, close bracket, close footnote. While the Viek, open bracket, folkmarks, close bracket, of the Russian cities regularly elected their dukes, always from the same Rurik family, covenanted with them and sent the knyaz away if he had provoked discontent. Open footnote. A considerable amount of research had to be done before this character of the so-called Udielny period was properly established by the works of Bielef, open bracket, Tales from Russian History, close bracket, Kostomarov, open bracket, The Beginnings of Autocracy in Russia, close bracket, and especially Professor Sergeyevich, open bracket, The Viek and the Prince, close bracket. The English reader may find some information about this period in the just named work of M. Kovalevsky in Rambo's History of Russia, and a short summary in the article Russia of the last edition of Chambers' Encyclopedia. Close footnote. At the same time, in most cities of Western and Southern Europe, the tendency was to take for defensor a bishop whom the city had elected itself, and so many bishops took that lead in protecting the immunities of the towns and in defending their liberties that numbers of them were considered after their death as saints and special patrons of different cities. Saint Ulthered of Winchester, Saint Ulrich of Augsburg, Saint Wolfgang of Ratisbon, Saint Heribert of Cologne, Saint Adalbert of Prague, and so on, as well as many abbots and monks, became so many city saints for having acted in defense of popular rights. Open footnote. Ferrari, Histoire des Révolutions d'Italie, first, 257, Calzen, Die Deutschen Staat im Mittelalter, BD, first, open bracket, Hall, 1891. Close bracket, close footnote. And under the new defences, whether laic or clerical, the citizens conquered full self-jurisdiction and self-administration for their folkmotes. Open footnote. See the excellent remarks of Mr. G. L. Gum as regards the folkmark of London, open bracket, The Literature of Local Institutions, London 1886, page 76, close bracket. It must however be remarked that in royal cities the folkmark never attained the independence which is assumed elsewhere. It is even certain that Moscow and Paris were chosen by the kings and the church as the cradles of the future royal authority in the state, because they did not possess the tradition of folkmote accustomed to act as sovereign in all matters. Close footnote. The whole progress of liberation progressed by a series of imperceptible acts of devotion to the common cause, accomplished by men who came out of the masses, by unknown heroes whose very names have not been preserved by history. The wonderful movement of the God's peace, open bracket, through that day, close bracket, by which the popular masses endeavored to put a limit to the endless family feuds of the nobles' families, was born in the young towns, the bishops and the citizens trying to extend to the nobles the peace they had established within their town walls. Open footnote. A. Lucier, Les Communes Françaises, also Clucon, Geschichte des Gottesfrieden, 1857, L. Semichon, open bracket, La Paix et la Trêve de Dieu, 2 volumes, Paris, 1869, close bracket, has tried to represent the communal movement as issued from that institution. In reality, the Trougadé, like the League started under Louis le Gros for the defense against both the robberies of the nobles and the Norman invasions, was a thoroughly popular movement. The only historian who mentions this last league, that is Vitalis, describes it as a popular community. Open bracket, Considération sur l'histoire de France, in volume 4 of Auguste Thierry's œuvre, Paris, 1868, page 191, and note, close bracket, close footnote. Already at that period, the commercial cities of Italy, and especially Amalfi, open bracket, which had its elected consuls since 844 and frequently changed its judges in the 10th century, close bracket, open footnote. Ferrari, first, 152, 263, etc., close footnote, worked out the customary maritime and commercial law, which later on became a model for all Europe. Ravenna elaborated its craft organization, and Milan, which had made its first revolution in 980, became a great center of commerce, its trade enjoying a full independence since the 11th century. Open footnote. Parents, Histoire de Florence, first, 188, Ferrari, LC, first, 283, close footnote. So also Bruges and Ghent, so also several cities of France in which the Mall au Forum had become a quite independent institution. Open footnote. Og Thierry, Essai sur l'histoire du tiers-état, Paris, 1875, page 414, note, close footnote. And already during that period began the work of artistic decoration of the towns by works of architecture which we still admire and which loudly testify of the intellectual movement of the times. The basilicae were then renewed in almost all the universe, Raoul Gleber wrote in his chronicle, and some of the finest monuments of medieval architecture date from that period. The wonderful old church of Bremen was built in the 9th century. St. Mark of Venice was finished in 1071 and the beautiful dome of Pisa in 1063. In fact, the intellectual movement, which has been described as the 12th century Renaissance, open footnote, F. Roquin, La Renaissance au XIIe siècle, in Études sur l'histoire de France, Paris 1875, pages 55 to 117, close footnote, and the 12th century rationalism, the precursor of the reform, open footnote, and Kostomarov, the rationalist of the 12th century, in his monographies and researches, open bracket, Russian, close bracket, close footnote, date from that period when most cities were still simple agglomerations of small village communities enclosed by walls. However, another element, besides the village community principle, was required to give to these growing centers of liberty and enlightenment the unity of thought and action and the powers of initiative which made their force in the 12th and 13th centuries, with the growing diversity of occupation, craft and arts, and with the growing commerce in distant land. Some new form of union was required, and this necessary new element was supplied by the guilds. Volumes and volumes have been written about these unions, which under the name of guilds, brotherhoods, friendships and truce themselves mean hotels in Russia, estates in Serbia and Turkey, Amkari in Georgia, and so on, took such a formidable development in medieval times and played such an important part in the emancipation of the cities. But it took historians more than 60 years before the universality of this institution and its true characters were understood. Only now, when hundreds of guild statutes have been published and studied, and their relationship to the Roman collegia and the earlier unions in Greece and in India, open footnote, very interesting facts related to the universality of guilds will be found in 2000 Years of Guild Life by Reverend G. M. Lambert Hull, 1891, on the Georgian Amkari, C.S. Egyazarov, Gorodskiye, Zeki, open bracket, Organization of Transcaucasian Amkari, close bracket, in Memoirs of the Caucasian Geographical Society, 14th to 1891, close footnote. Is known, can we maintain with full confidence that these brotherhoods were but a further development of the same principles which we saw at work in the gens and the village community. Nothing illustrates better these medieval brotherhoods than those temporary guilds which were formed on board ships. When a ship of the Hansa had accomplished her first half-day passage, after having left the port, the captain, open bracket, Schiffer, close bracket, gathered all crew and passengers on the deck and held the following language as reported by a contemporary. "As we are now at the mercy of God and the waves," he said, "each one must be equal to each other, and as we are surrounded by storms, high waves, pirates, and other dangers, we must keep a strict order that we may bring our voyage to a good end. That is why we shall pronounce the prayer for a good wind and good success, and according to marine law we shall name the occupiers of the judges' seats, open bracket, Schuffenstellen, close bracket." Thereupon the crew elected a Vogt and 4 Scabini to act as their judges. At the end of the voyage, the Vogt and the Scabini abdicated their functions and addressed the "What has happened on board ship with crew" as follows: "Must pardon to each other and consider as dead, open bracket, tund und absen lassen, close bracket. What we have judged right was for the sake of justice. This is why we beg you all, in the name of honest justice, to forget all the animosity one may nourish against another, and to swear on bread and salt that he will not think of it in a bad spirit. If anyone, however, considers himself wrong, he must appeal to the Landvogt and ask justice from him before sunset." On landing, the stock with the freight fines was handed over to the Vogt of the seaport for distribution among the poor. Open footnote. G. de Wunderets Reserberich in Fischer Frankfurter Archiv, second 245, quoted by Janssen, Geschichte des Deutschen Volks, first 335. Close footnote. This simple narrative, perhaps better than anything else, depicts the spirit of the medieval guilds. Like organizations came into existence wherever a group of men, fishermen, hunters, traveling merchants, builders, or settled craftsmen came together for a common pursuit. Thus there was on board ship the naval authority of the captain, but for the very success of the common enterprise, all men on board, rich and poor, masters and crew, captain and sailors, agreed to be equals in their mutual relations, to be simply men bound to aid each other and to settle their possible disputes before judges elected by all of them. So also when a number of craftsmen, masons, carpenters, stonecutters, etc., came together for building, say, a cathedral, they all belonged to a city which had its political organization, and each of them belonged moreover to his own craft, but they were united besides by their common enterprise, which they knew better than anyone else, and they joined into a body united by closer although temporary bonds. They founded the guild for the building of the cathedral. Open footnote. Dr. Leonard Innen, Der Domzukunft, historisch Etlingut, 1871, pages 46-50, close footnote. We may see the same till now in the Kabylian Kof, open footnote. See previous chapter. Close footnote. The Kabbalists have their village community, but this union is not sufficient for all political, commercial, and personal needs of union, and the closer brotherhood of the Kof is constituted. As to the social characters of the medieval guild, any guild statute may illustrate them. Taking for instance the Skra of some early Danish guild, we read in it first a statement of the general brotherly feelings which must reign in the guild. Next come the regulations relative to self-jurisdiction in cases of quarrels arising between two brothers, or a brother and a stranger, and then the social duties of the brethren are enumerated. If a brother's house is burned, or he has lost his ship, or has suffered on a pilgrim's voyage, all the brethren must come to his aid. If a brother falls dangerously ill, two brethren must keep watch by his bed till he is out of danger, and if he dies, the brethren must bury him, a great affair in those times of pestilences, and follow him to the church and the grave. After his death they must provide for his children. If necessary, very often the widow becomes a sister to the guild. Open footnote. Kofod Anscher Omgal Dansk Gilder og deres Undergang, Copenhagen, 1785, Statutes of a New Guild. Close footnote. These two leading features appeared in every brotherhood formed for any possible purpose. In each case the members treated each other as, and named each other brother and sister. Open footnote. Upon the position of women in guilds, see Miss Tulmin Smith's introductory remarks to the English guilds of her father. One of the Cambridge Statutes, open bracket, page 281, close bracket, of the year 1503, is quite positive in the following sentence. This statute is made by the common assent of all the brethren and sisters of All Hallowe Guild. Close footnote. All were equals before the guild. They owned some chattel, open bracket, cattle, land, buildings, places of worship, or stock, close bracket, in common. All brothers took the oath of abandoning all feuds of old, and without imposing upon each other the obligation of never quarrelling again, they agreed that no quarrel should degenerate into a feud or into a lawsuit before another court than the tribunal of the brothers themselves, and if a brother was involved in a quarrel with a stranger to the guild, they agreed to support him for bad and for good, that is, whether he was unjustly accused of aggression or really was the aggressor. They had to support him and to bring things to a peaceful end, so long as his was not a secret aggression, in which case he would have been treated as an outlaw. The brotherhood stood by him. Open footnote. In medieval times, only secret aggression was treated as a murder. Blood revenge in broad daylight was justice, and slaying in a quarrel was not murder, once the aggressor showed his willingness to repent and to repair the wrong he had done. Deep traces of this distinction still exist in modern criminal law, especially in Russia. Close footnote. If the relatives of the wronged man wanted to revenge the offense at once by a new aggression, the brotherhood supplied him with a horse to run away, or with a boat, a pair of oars, a knife, and a steel for striking light. If he remained in town, 12 brothers accompanied him to protect him, and in the meantime they arranged the composition. They went to court to support by oath the truthfulness of his statements, and if he was found guilty they did not let him go to full ruin and become a slave for not paying the due compensation. They all pay it, just as the gents did in olden times. Only when a brother had broken the faith towards his guild brethren or other people, he was excluded from the brotherhood with a nothing's name. Open bracket, Vad skall han meles afbrudskap med nidingsnaf, close bracket. Open footnote. Kofod Anker LC. This old booklet contains much that has been lost of by later explorers. Close footnote. Such were the leading ideas of those brotherhoods which gradually covered the whole of medieval life. In fact, we know of guilds among all possible professions. Guilds of serfs, open footnote. They played an important part in the revolts of the serfs, and were therefore prohibited several times in succession in the second half of the 9th century. Of course, the king's prohibitions remained a dead letter. Close footnote. Guilds of freemen and guilds of both serfs and freemen. Guilds called into life for the special purpose of hunting, fishing, or a trading expedition, and dissolved when the special purpose had been achieved, and guilds lasting for centuries in a given craft or trade, and in proportion as life took an always greater variety of pursuits, the variety in the guilds grew in proportion. So we see not only merchants, craftsmen, hunters, and peasants united in guilds, we also see guilds of priors, painters, teachers of primary schools and universities, guilds for performing the passion play, for building a church, for developing developing a mystery of a given school of art or craft, or for a special recreation, even guilds among beggars, executioners, and lost women, all organized on the same double principle of self-jurisdiction and mutual support. Footnote. The medieval Italian painters were also organized in guilds, which became at a later epoch academies of art. If the Italian art of those times is impressed with so much individuality that we distinguish even now between the different schools of Padua, Bassano, Treviso, Verona, and so on, although all these cities were under the sway of Venice, this was due, G. Paul Richter remarks, to the fact that the painters of each city belonged to a separate guild, friendly with the guilds of other towns, but leading a separate existence. The oldest guild statute known is that of Verona, dating from 1303, but evidently copied from some much older statute. Fraternal assistance in necessity of whatever kind, hospitality towards strangers when passing through the town, as thus information may be obtained about matters which one may like to learn, and obligation of offering comfort in case of debility, or among the obligations of the members (19th century, November 1890 and August 1892). Footnote. For Russia we have positive evidence showing that the very making of Russia was as much the work of its hunters, fishermen and traders artels as of the budding village communities, and up to the present day the country is covered with artels. Footnote. The chief works on the artels are named in the article Russia of the Encyclopedia Britannica, 9th edition, page 84. Footnote. These few remarks show how incorrect was the view taken by some early explorers of the guilds when they wanted to see the essence of the institution in its yearly festival. In reality, the day of the common meal was always the day or the morrow of the day of election of aldermen, of discussion of alterations in the statutes, and very often the day of judgment of quarrels that had risen among the brethren. Footnote. See for instance the text of the Cambridge Guilds given by Toulmin Smith (English Guilds, London 1870, pages 274 to 276), from which it appears that the general and principal day was the election day, or Ch.M. Clodd's The Early History of the Guild of the Merchant Tailors, London 1888, first, 45, and so on. The renewal of allegiance, see the Jomsviking saga mentioned in Pappenheim's Old Danish Schutzgilden, Breslau 1885, page 67. It appears very probable that when the guilds began to be prosecuted, many of them inscribed in their statutes the meal day only, or the pious duties, and only alluded to the judicial function of the guild in vague words, but this function did not disappear till a very much later time. The question, who will be my judge, has no meaning now, since the state has appropriated for its bureaucracy the organization of justice, but it was of primordial importance in medieval times, the more so as self-jurisdiction meant self-administration. It must also be remarked that the translation of the Saxon and Danish guild brethren, or brother, by the Latin convivi must also have contributed to the above confusion. Footnote. Or of renewed allegiance to the guild. The common meal, like the festival at the old tribal folkmote, the mal or malum, or the Buriat Abba, or the parish feast and the harvest supper, was simply an affirmation of brotherhood. It symbolized the times when everything was kept in common by the clan. This day at least all belonged to all. All sat at the same table and partook of the same meal. Even at a much later time, the inmate of the almshouse of a London guild sat this day by the side of a rich alderman. As to the distinction which several explorers have tried to establish between the old Saxon thrift guild and the so-called social or religious guilds, all were thrift guilds in the sense above mentioned. Footnote. See the excellent remarks upon the Thrift Guild by G.R. Green and Mrs. Green in The Conquest of England, London 1883, pages 229 to 230. Footnote. And all were religious in the sense in which a village community or a city placed under the protection of a special saint is social and religious. If the institution of a guild has taken such an immense extension in Asia, Africa and Europe, if it has lived thousands of years, reappearing again and again when similar conditions called it into existence, it is because it was much more than an eating association, or an association for going to church on a certain day, or a burial club. It answered to a deeply enrooted want of human nature, and it embodied all the attributes which the state appropriated later on for its bureaucracy and police, and much more than that. It was an association for mutual support in all circumstances and in all accidents of life, by deed and advice, and it was an organization for maintaining justice, with this difference from the state that on all these occasions a humane, a brotherly element was introduced instead of the formal element which is the essential characteristic of state interference. Even when appearing before the guild tribunal, the guild brother answered before men who knew him well, and had stood by him before in their daily work at the common mill, in the performance of their brotherly duties, men who were his equals and brethren indeed, no theorists of law, no defenders of some one else's interest. It is evident that an institution so well suited to serve the need of union, without depriving the individual of his initiative, could but spread, grow, and fortify. The difficulty was only to find such form as would permit to federate the unions of the guilds without interfering with the unions of the village communities, and to federate all these into one harmonious whole. And when this form of combination had been found, and a series of favourable circumstances permitted the cities to affirm their independence, they did so with a unity of thought which can but excite our admiration even in our century of railways, telegraphs, and printing. Hundreds of charters in which the cities inscribe their liberation have reached us, and through all of them, notwithstanding the infinite variety of details which depended upon the more or less greater fullness of emancipation, the same leading ideas run. The city organized itself as a federation of both small village communities and guilds. All those who belong to the friendship of the town, so runs a charter given in 1188 to the burgesses of Aire by Philip Count of Flanders, are promised and confirmed by faith and oath that they will aid each other as brethren in whatever is useful and honest; that if one commits against another an offence in words or in deeds, the one who has suffered therefrom will not take revenge either himself or his people. He will lodge a complaint, and the offender will make good for his offence, according to what will be pronounced by 12 elected judges acting as arbiters, and if the offender or the offended, after having been warned thrice, does not submit to the decision of the arbiters, he will be excluded from the friendship as a wicked man and a perjurer. Recueil des ordonnances des rois de France, tome 12e, 562, quoted by Og. Thierry, in Considération sur l'histoire de France, page 196, edition 12 MO. Each one of the men of the commune will be faithful to his conjurer, and will give him aid and advice, according to what justice will dictate him. The Amiens and Abbeville charters say, all will aid each other according to their powers within the boundaries of the commune, and will not suffer that any one takes anything from any one of them, or makes one pay contributions. Do we read in the charters of Soissons, Compiègne, Senlis, and many others of the same type. A Lucia, les communes françaises, pages 45 to 46. And so on with countless variations on the same theme. The commune, Gilbert de Noguet wrote, is an oath of mutual aid (mutuo adjutori conjuratio), a new and detestable word. Through it the serfs (capitecensi) are freed from all serfdom. Through it they can only be condemned to a legally determined fine for breaches of the law. Through it they cease to be liable to payments which the serfs always used to pay. Gilbert de Noguet de Vitassoa, quoted by Lucaire, LC, page 14. The same wave of emancipation ran in the 12th century through all parts of the continent, involving both rich cities and the poorest towns. And if we may say that as a rule the Italian cities were the first to free themselves, we can assign no centre from which the movement would have spread. Very often a small burg in Central Europe took the lead for its region, and big agglomerations accepted the little town's charter as a model for their own. Thus the charter of a small town, Loris, was adopted by 83 towns in southwest France, and that of Beaumont became the model for over 500 towns and cities in Belgium and France. Special deputies were dispatched by the cities to their neighbours to obtain a copy from the charter, and the constitution was framed upon that model. However, they did not simply copy each other, they framed their own charters in accordance with the concessions they had obtained from their lords, and the result was that, as remarked by an historian, the charters of the medieval communes offer the same variety as the Gothic architecture of their churches and cathedrals, the same leading ideas in all of them, the cathedral symbolizing the union of parish and guild in the city, and the same infinitely rich variety of detail. Self-jurisdiction was the essential point, and self-jurisdiction means self-administration, but the commune was not simply an autonomous part of the state. Such ambiguous words had not yet been invented by that time. It was a state in itself. It had the right of war and peace, of federation and alliance with its neighbours. It was sovereign in its own affairs and mixed with no others. The supreme political power could be vested entirely in a democratic form, as was the case in Pskov, whose Viec sent and received ambassadors, concluded treaties, accepted and sent away princes, or went on without them for dozens of years, or it was vested in or usurped by an aristocracy of merchants, or even nobles, as was the case in hundreds of Italian and Middle European cities. The principle nevertheless remained the same. The city was a state, and what was perhaps still more remarkable, when the power in the city was usurped by an aristocracy of merchants or even nobles, the inner life of the city and the democratism of its daily life did not disappear. They depended but little upon what may be called the political form of a state. The secret of this seeming anomaly lies in the fact that a medieval city was not a centralized state. During the first centuries of its existence, the city hardly could be named a state as regards its interior organization, because the Middle Ages knew no more of the present centralization of functions than of the present territorial centralization. Each group had its share of sovereignty. The city was usually divided into 4 quarters, or into 5 to 7 sections radiating from the center, each quarter or section roughly corresponding to a certain trade or profession which prevailed in it, but nevertheless containing inhabitants of different social positions and occupations, nobles, merchants, artisans, or even half-serfs, and each section or quarter constituted a quite independent agglomeration. In Venice, each island was an independent political community. It had its own organized trades, its own commerce in salt, its own jurisdiction and administration, its own forum, and the nomination of a doge by the city changed nothing in the inner independence of the units. Le Bret, Histoire de Venice, first, 393, also Marin quoted by Leo and Botta in Histoire de l'Italie, French edition, 1844, tome 1er, 500. In Cologne, we see the inhabitants divided into Geburtschaften and Heimschaften, Vicinia, that is, neighbor guilds, which dated from the Franconian period. Each of them had its judge, Buriter, and the usual 12 elected centers finders, Chofen, its vogt, and its grave or commander of the local militia. Dr. W. Arnold, Verfassungsgeschichtsche der Deutschen Freistaats, 1854, BD, 2nd, 227, sequence in N. Gekrich der Stadtquellen, BD, 1st, 228 to 229, also the documents published by N and Eckert. The story of early London before the conquest, Mr. Green says, is that of a number of little groups scattered here and there over the area within the walls, each growing up with its own life and institutions, guilds, soaks, wages houses, and the like, and only slowly drawing together into a municipal union. Conquest of England, 1883, page 453. And if we refer to the annals of the Russian cities, Novgorod and Pskov, both of which are relatively rich in local details, we find the section Konets, consisting of independent streets, Ulitsa, each of which, though chiefly people with artisans of a certain craft, had also merchants and landowners among its inhabitants, and was a separate community. It had the communal responsibility of all members in case of crime, its own jurisdiction and administration by street aldermen (Ulitcharskia Starosti), its own seal, and in case of need, its own forum, its own militia, as also its self-elected priors, and its own collective life and collective enterprise. Lilev, Russian History, volumes 2nd and 3rd. The medieval city thus appears as a double federation of all householders united into small territorial unions, the street, the parish, the section, and of individuals united by oath into guilds according to their professions, the former being a produce of the village community origin of the city, while the second is a subsequent growth called to life by new conditions. To guarantee liberty, self-administration, and peace was the chief aim of the medieval city, and labor, as we shall presently see when speaking of the craft guilds, was its chief foundation. But production did not absorb the whole attention of the medieval economist. With his practical mind, he understood that consumption must be guaranteed in order to obtain production, and therefore to provide for the common first food and lodging of poor and rich alike. Gemein, Notdurf und Gemarmer und Richer. W. Gramich, Verfassungen, Verwaltungsgeschichte der Stadt Augsburg im 13. bis zum 15. Jahrhundert. Augsburg, 1882, page 34. Was a fundamental principle in each city. The purchase of food supplies and other first necessaries (coal, wood, etc.) before they had reached the market, or altogether in especially favorable conditions from which others would be excluded, the preemption, in a word, was entirely prohibited. Everything had to go to the market and be offered there for everyone's purchase, till the ringing of the bell had closed the market. Then only could the retailer buy the remainder, and even then his profit should be an honest profit only. When a boat brought a cargo of coal to Wurzburg, coal could only be sold in retail during the first 8 days, each family being entitled to no more than 50 basketfuls. The remaining cargo could be sold wholesale, but the retailer was allowed to raise a Sittlicher profit only, the unsittlicher or dishonest profit being strictly forbidden. Grammich, LC, same in London, Liber Albus, quoted by Oschenkovsky, page 161, and in fact everywhere. Moreover, when corn was bought by a baker wholesale after the close of the market, every citizen had the right to claim part of the corn (about half a quarter) for his own use at wholesale price if he did so before the final conclusion of the bargain, and reciprocally every baker could claim the same if a citizen purchased corn for reselling it. In the first case the corn had only to be brought to the town mill to be ground in its proper turn for its settled price, and the bread could be baked in the fourbanal or communal oven. See Fagner's Études sur l'industrie et la classe industrielle à Paris au XIIIe et XIVe siècle, Paris 1877, pages 155 sequence. It hardly need be added that the tax on bread, and on beer as well, was settled after careful experiments as to the quantity of bread and beer which could be obtained from a given amount of corn. The Amiens archives contain the minutes of such experiences (et de Calonne, LC, pages 77-93, also those of London Oschenkovsky, England's Wheatschafflich and Wilkelung, etc. Jena, 1879, page 165. In short, if a scarcity visited the city, all had to suffer from it more or less, but apart from the calamities, so long as the free cities existed, no one could die in their midst from starvation, as is unhappily too often the case in our own times. However, all such regulations belong to later periods of the city's life, while at an earlier period it was the city itself which used to buy all food supplies for the use of the citizens. The documents recently published by Mr. Gross are quite positive on this point, and fully support his conclusion to the effect that the cargoes of subsistences were purchased by certain civic officials in the name of the town, and then distributed in shares among the merchant burgesses, no one being allowed to buy wares landed in the port unless the municipal authorities refused to purchase them. This seems, she adds, to have been quite a common practice in England, Ireland, Wales and Scotland. C.H. Gross, The Gilt Merchant, Oxford, 1890, first, 135. His documents prove that this practice existed in Liverpool, second, 148-150, Waterford in Ireland, Neath in Wales, and Linlithgow and Chaucer in Scotland. Mr. Gross' texts also show that the purchases were made for distribution, not only among the merchant burgesses, but upon all citizens and communards, page 156. Note, or as the Tussauds Ordinance of the 17th century runs, to make offer to the merchants, craftsmen, and inhabitants of the said burg, that they may have their proportion of the same according to their necessities and ability. Even in the 16th century we find that common purchases of corn were made for the commodity and profit in all things of this city and chamber of London, and of all the citizens and inhabitants of the same, as much as in Osliet, as the mayor wrote in 1565. The early history of the Guild of Merchant Tailors by Charles M. Claude, London 1888, first 361, Appendix 10, also the following appendix, which shows that the same purchases were made in 1546. In Venice, the whole of the trade in corn is well known to have been in the hands of the city, the quarters, on receiving the cereals from the board which administrated the imports, being bound to send to every citizen's house the quantity allotted to him. See Boileau, Les conditions économiques de l'Italie au temps de Dante, Paris 1865, page 44. In France, the city of Amiens used to purchase salt and to distribute it to all citizens at cost price. A de Calonne, la vie municipale au XVe siècle, dans le nord de la France, Paris 1880, pages 12 to 16. In 1485, the city permitted the export to Antwerp of a certain quantity of corn, the inhabitants of Antwerp being always ready to be agreeable to the merchants and burgesses of Amiens. Ibid. pages 75 to 77, and text, close bracket, close footnote. And even now one sees in many French towns the halles which formerly were municipal depots for corn and salt. Open footnote. À Babot, la ville sous l'Ancien Régime, Paris, 1880. Close footnote. In Russia, it was a regular custom in Novgorod and Pskov. The whole matter relative to the communal purchases for the use of the citizens and the manner in which they used to be made seems not to have yet received proper attention from the historians of the period, but there are here and there some very interesting facts which throw a new light upon it. Thus there is among Mr. Gross' documents a Kilkenny ordinance of the year 1367, from which we learn how the prices of the goods were established. The merchants and the sailors, Mr. Gross writes, were to state on oath the first cost of the goods and the expenses of transportation. Then the mayor of the town and two discreet men were to name the price at which the wares were to be sold. The same rule held good in Turso for merchandise coming by sea or land. This way of naming the price so well answers to the very conceptions of trade which were current in medieval times that it must have been all but universal. To have the price established by a third person was a very old custom, and for all interchange within the city it certainly was a widely spread habit to leave the establishment of prices to discreet men, to a third party, and not to the vendor or the buyer. But this order of things takes us still further back in the history of trade, namely to a time when trade in staple produce was carried on by the whole city, and the merchants were only the commissioners, the trustees of the city for selling the goods which it exported. A Waterford ordinance, published also by Mr. Gross, says that all manner of merchandise whatsoever kin they be of shall be bought by the mayor and valets which been (common buyers for the town) for the time being, and to distribute the same on freemen of the city (the prop goods of free citizens and inhabitants only excepted). This ordinance can hardly be explained otherwise than by admitting that all the exterior trade of the town was carried on by its agents. Moreover, we have direct evidence of such having been the case for Novgorod and Pskov. It was the sovereign Novgorod and the sovereign Pskov who sent the caravans of merchants to distant lands. We know also that in nearly all medieval cities of Middle and Western Europe, the craft guilds used to buy as a body all necessary raw produce and to sell the produce of their work through their officials, and it is hardly possible that the same should not have been done for exterior trade, the more so as it is well known that up to the 13th century not only all merchants of a given city were considered abroad as responsible in a body for debts contracted by any one of them, but the whole city as well was responsible for the debts of each one of its merchants. Only in the 12th and 13th century the towns on the Rhine entered into special treaties abolishing this responsibility. In Geskisch Gestat Köln First 491-492, also text, close footnote. And finally we have the remarkable Ipswich document published by Mr. Gross, from which document we learn that the merchant guild of this town was constituted by all who had the freedom of the city and who wished to pay their contribution (their hands) to the guild, the whole community discussing all together how better to maintain the merchant guild and giving it certain privileges. The merchant guild of Ipswich thus appears rather as a body of trustees of the town than as a common private guild. In short, the more we begin to know the medieval city, the more we see that it was not simply a political organization for the protection of certain political liberties. It was an attempt at organizing on a much grander scale than in a village community, a close union for mutual aid and support, for consumption and production, and for social life altogether, without imposing upon men the fetters of the state, but giving full liberty of expression to the creative genius of each separate group of individuals in art, craft, science, commerce and political organization. How far this attempt has been successful will be best seen when we have analyzed in the next chapter the organization of labor in the medieval city and the relations of the cities with the surrounding peasant population. End of chapter 5. Recording by Enko.